Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Patterson Podcast. Today's episode is with Jacob Smith. Jacob is a food journalist, and he's been operating in Edinburgh. He worked with the Courier for a period and has also been freelance for quite a few years. Really enjoyed speaking to Jacob. We covered quite a lot. We talked about what it's like being freelance. We talked about the act of writing, about creativity, about getting paid, about some of the implications of AI. So it was wide-ranging and really interesting. Jacob's a fascinating guy, very articulate, very intelligent. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. So without further ado, here is Jacob Smith. Here we are. Oh, Jacob. Mm-hmm. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for taking the time today to speak to me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. It's great to see you, man. It's been a while. I've not seen each other a wee bit.
Yeah. I took some time off jiu-jitsu with work, and I'm going during the daytime now because my job's changed.
Nice.
So I have kind of fallen out the loop with some people, which is unfortunate. But
so have I. I've not been doing jiu-jitsu for the past wee while because that is how we know each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're the third low tide guest. Really minding the community for
interesting group.
It is, right? There's just such interesting people. Really like kind of high agency people. I think people that are doing things, people that want to do things, people make things happen.
Yeah. I think it's quite an intimidating thing to first go to.
Mm-hmm.
So you often get people that are quite proactive and know themselves quite well doing jiu-jitsu, I think, anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. When did you start jiu-jitsu?
I started in 2019. I actually started because of Georgina, my partner. So during university, I was boxing a lot. Before that, I played rugby for a long time. But I both kind of left those things by the wayside for various reasons. I was surfing, but I've always been very active, studied sports science. I really wanted to have like a sport to dedicate myself to because, rugby training, training all the time, you're playing on weekends, boxing the same, you're always sparring. But I didn't really have that thing. And that's when I met Georgina, and she did jiu-jitsu. She was a blue belt. So she took me to my first class in Exeter. And I did that until lockdown, and then spent some time living at my parents with Georgina doing like drilling with me. And then when we moved to Edinburgh, obviously started at low tide, and have been going there for like 4 years now. So
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know you studied sports science as well.
That was my undergrad. Yeah. Then I did a master's in conflict, security, and development. So I've kind of, done a lot of different things.
Yeah. That's also conflict and security and development, as in is that like international security?
Yeah. So I don't actually know. It's difficult to say why I chose to do it. There was a period in my life where I was very keen to work in charities, and I wanted to work abroad. I was teaching English in Spain when I actually signed up for the course. So I was really enjoying living abroad. And I thought that was the kind of thing I wanted to do. I wanted to help people. And the course was really interesting. So everything from like cybersecurity to modules on, the causes of genocide and the challenges around supplying aid to countries, that kind of thing. So it was very interesting, but by the end of it, I didn't want to work in the sector. So I still not decided if it was a good course or not in that sense. But I did find it very interesting, and I actually started writing as a result of one of the modules on that course. So I did gain something from it in the long term.
Okay.
So yeah.
So why not? What put you off?
A few things. It's a very difficult industry to get into unless you can do unpaid internships. Because a lot of, take the UN, for example, a lot of the lower stuff is very competitive to get into, and a lot of it is unpaid. I actually did an unpaid position with a Indigenous rights charity as part of the degree, and I continued that on for a while afterwards. But when it became apparent it wasn't going to turn into a job, I kind of eased myself out of it because COVID was coming to an end, and I kind of needed to think about what I was actually going to do. And then the other kind of side of it is a lot of my lecturers were slightly jaded, I think, especially about big international organizations. They talked a lot about how inefficient they are, how corrupt some of them are. And I think some of them found working in those places difficult. The message I got was, if you want to make a difference, work in a grassroots organization, work locally, and work with a small community. And I think a lot of people, especially when, you're like 21, you want to save the world. And you think, I want to work for the biggest organization on these massive projects. But yeah, I kind of got the impression that it could be quite a challenging career when you want to do good, and for various reasons that might not happen.
That's really interesting you say that. The guest I had on just yesterday, a guy called Oleg Dmitriev, he is the head of Sunflower Edinburgh, which is a charity which is providing aid to people in Ukraine. And he said a very, very similar thing.
Okay.
He said that his charity is quite small, which means it can be very, very agile, and so that he can deliver aid where it's needed and in the form it's needed as well. Because he said that, say that some doctors, for example, you'll deliver things to them, and if the equipment is out of date or just not what they need, they essentially just throw it away, and so much of it's wasted. And he said that some of his, at the start of the war, some of his aid was getting to like massive truckloads, were getting to the west of Ukraine, and they just wouldn't get any further. And where they were really, really needed were the front lines, where people couldn't get supplies and stuff. But he said the same thing, like the Red Cross and like these huge international organizations were really, really inefficient and actually weren't delivering the kind of aid that was needed.
Yeah, it's like there's inefficiencies, and I find in so many scenarios, I find like when there's two parties trying to do the right thing, but because of a miscommunication, something goes wrong, whether that's like an interaction with like a person or a customer, or, between organizations, for some reason, that frustrates me more than when there's like an angry party just having a go at someone. I find a miscommunication just like infinitely frustrating. For like at school, if a teacher tells you off for something, but you had a very good reason for doing it, but they don't want to hear your explanation, like that kind of stuff just kills me. So I don't think it was the career for me. I have worked in some social enterprises, like on the side, like with writing. I've done communication stuff, most recently with Edinburgh Food Social, which is a social enterprise based in Craigmillar, and they teach local kids how to cook with Scottish food, seasonal Scottish produce, how to eat healthily, that kind of thing. And that was great because we've basically focused on Craigmillar and Niddry, and the kids come in and they learn how to cook. And for me, that was super impactful. We're not looking to change the dietary habits of Scotland or of even, wider Edinburgh, just this one underserved community. And the kids enjoyed it. So that was rewarding. But then I think on the flip side, communications and marketing just isn't a rule for me. I struggle with social media. I struggle with marketing copy. I prefer to write articles, that kind of thing.
You said one of the modules in your master's was what made you start writing?
Yes. Yeah. That was really interesting. This is like my best experience of education throughout my whole life. I did a module on race, class and gender differences between the States and the UK. So we looked at the way people are treated historically and today. And I had a really amazing lecturer called Beachley. And there's probably like 6 of us in the class. And she set these incredible, interesting readings. So it was like fiction and newspaper articles, and we'd watch films on homelessness, and the kind of readings that really get you thinking. It's not sure. Like I was reading this stuff and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then the 2-hour, might have been 2.5-hour class was literally just 6 of us, and we just discussed what we thought of the readings and what they made us think. And it was just, I remember just sitting there, this is quite early on in the module, I remember sitting there and being like, this is what I thought university would be like, just like everyone here is engaged. When I was doing sports science, like one thing the readings were like, you read to learn what is right, what is correct at the moment. There's not really a great deal of thinking about it. It's like, this study showed this, learn it. And in our modules, there was like 150 people probably in some of our lectures. and no one would answer questions. It got to the point where one of our lecturers would throw cans of Guinness in the air and people would have to catch them, otherwise they'd explode. And the person who caught it got the can of Guinness, but had to answer the question. That's how dire it was. It was just like being at secondary school. Whereas in Beach's class, everyone had something to say. And it was all really, really interesting value stuff. We had like a set of ground rules, things we wouldn't, say, or the ways we wouldn't act towards one another. So we could have this disagreement if we wanted to in a civil way. But the reason I started writing was one of her assessments was to write an op-ed on anything we'd studied. So I did it about like the racist nature of early photography equipment, because some film used in early cameras wasn't designed for black skin, so it was very difficult to take good pictures of black people. So I wrote this thing. It was, quite an interesting topic, but I remember, I think it's only 800 words, but I remember really enjoying the act of writing it, being like, wow, this is really, really enjoyable, just sitting down and kind of seeing my thoughts come out and trying to link them all together. And yeah, that's when I started just writing in my spare time. And it kind of went from there. Yeah.
Because now, well, yeah, how long ago was that?
I finished in the summer of 2020. So yeah, 5 years ago. The module was 2019. So yeah, 5-6 years ago.
And then you've kind of, as long as I've known you, you've been writing. You've been you're a writer.
Wow. Yeah, it depends. That for a long time I struggled with that. Like, when do you call yourself a writer? Is it something that you decide, I take it seriously, so I'm a writer, or do you look at it as in like, where do I earn my money? If I earn most of my money, does that make me a writer? And I think for me now, it's probably a blend of the two. But yeah, I've worked as a freelancer. I've worked on staff. I've done a variety of things with it. And at the moment, actually, recently, I haven't been writing a great deal of journalism at all, just because I finished my my contract at DC Thompson. So there's a challenge in that, being like, I am a writer, I've written all these things, but at the moment, I don't earn my money from writing for the first time in probably 3 years, 3.5 years. So it's trying to kind of square that with myself as well, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was actually one of the things I had written down to talk to you about was making money writing. So I saw that on your Instagram. That was all the things you were talking about. Is like because it can be, and I can attest to this from personal experience. It can be very, very difficult if you're good. I think as you said in one of your reels, there's some places that'll pay you £800 for your work, and then there's other places that'll pay you £80, and often it'll work out way below minimum wage, especially when you take in all the like reporting and then the actual writing and editing and submitting and then the re-editing and all that.
Yeah.
Like the hours you put in, often, I mean, and especially now with AI.
Yeah.
It came out during my undergraduate in journalism second year when ChatGPT launched. They were transition to video.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from my perspective, feed writing is quite good in terms of being secure from AI, because I think, especially when it comes to reviewing, people want to hear from someone who can actually taste. But yeah, in terms of earning money, the whole time I was a freelancer, so I started out after I did my degree, I was working in a cafe in Edinburgh, and I was writing on the side, and I was getting paid like £25 an article, and then £50 an article, and then I got contacted by an American brand, which I won't name, and they asked me if I wanted to write for them, and they offered me 8 cents per word, and I was obviously earning minimum wage at the cafe, so I thought, what's to lose? So I went full-time writing for them, and it was clickbait. It was food stuff, but it was a lot of clickbait. And I was definitely earning less than minimum wage then. The only reason I could afford to do it is because me and Katrina were splitting an extremely cheap flat in Dalry.
Nice. Yeah.
So I could afford to live on it. And then during the 3.5 years I worked full time, I wrote for a variety of publications, National Geographic Traveller Food, Delicious Magazine, quite a few others as well. Pelican, and that's an independent beer magazine. And it's the independence in my experience that I've paid the most. So if I wrote a feature for Pellicle and provided photography as well, I'd be probably getting paid over £600. If I wrote a piece for the print magazines for the Nationals, you're probably looking at 125, 150 quid. And granted, it is shorter stuff. I've never written a 2,000 word article for a national or anything like that, not for lack of trying. But yeah, as a freelancer, there's not much money in it. I'm a member of the Guild of Food Writers. A lot of the members are older and they remember kind of the heyday of Fleet Street, and they were getting paid more then than we are now. And then you obviously take like inflation into that and kind of cost of living, and it's not very sustainable. I think if you're going to be I can only speak for food writing. If you want to be a food writer, I think you need to be willing to have another job or be prepared to work other jobs in the in-between. That said, the 6 months during the time I was at the Courier at DC Thompson, I earned a really good salary, good pension. So there are ways to do it. There are opportunities where you can make a living, but I think it is very, very hard. But, all the people I've met who write on the side or write as their full-time job, whatever, like no one's in it for the money. So if you really love writing, I guess it's kind of a moot point discussing finances. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I wish everyone was paid better because I know how hard people work, but equally media has changed. You talked about AI and stuff, like it's a whole new world. And when newspapers were big, advertising brought in so much money, and that's just not the case anymore. So, yeah.
So some of the stories our lecturers had, studied journalism at Union, some of the stories they had of, as you say, the heyday of Fleet Street.
Yeah.
And like Alan, one of the lecturers, was saying that we used to get lunch tickets that would be, I think he used to get lunch tickets, and they would go upstairs and they would have like a 3-course buffet meal with like, there was like champagne and alcohol. It just as much as you could eat, and everyone was up there and just having a great time. And there was just wealth. Yeah. There was just shitloads of money in the peak of newspapers. And since that, in the past maybe 20 years or so, it has absolutely collapsed. It's evolving, it's changing. Yeah. But there is nowhere near as much money as there used to be.
No, there isn't. I've actually got some family that worked in selling advertising for newspapers, and they're out for lunch, every day of the week. That's where business was done. And now, you're lucky to get free coffee. So yeah, I think, and obviously, like staff numbers have decreased massively. When I was working at the Courier, one of the guys on my desk just celebrated his 30th anniversary there. And he was talking about, the number of local reporters they used to had was astronomical. And now that's just not the case. Everything is super lean just because it has to be. Mm-hmm. And, that pushes a lot of talented people into freelancing. Freelancing becomes a lot more competitive. And then, you don't need to pay people well. So it is all linked together. But it's very difficult when you find a lot of value in the work to walk away. I'm kind of reaching that age now where a lot of my friends who I studied with at university who work in business or finance or whatever down in London, they bought houses in London, and my mum will be, oh, have you considered buying? I hardly afford to pay rent, mate. I'm not saving up a deposit. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of the reality that a lot of creatives face. Yeah. I remember reading all this stuff when I was considering doing it as a job. And you read actually the same stuff from chefs who work in chefing. They're like, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's too much hard work. And then at the end, they'll kind of say, oh, but if you really, really want to, it's the best job in the world. And I definitely see that. Would I recommend working as a food writer or a journalist to someone my children in the future? Definitely not. But if they love it, you have to do it. I think for me, I couldn't really see myself doing anything else. So no matter what happens, I feel like I'm kind of tied to it.
Yeah. Well, man, that is the thing, isn't it? I was actually having a very similar conversation with my friend Ross last night. He's a journalist at Deadline News, which is a news agency in Edinburgh. And that's what we're saying. Like, unless you are really committed and passionate and you're willing to persevere and get paid buttons, really, like, especially comparatively, that's the other thing. It's like, it's one thing, yeah, you're getting paid to do this writing, do this creative work, which is a fantastic thing. But as you said, when you start to compare it to other people who maybe of a similar age to you, and then they did just go down the route of, you know, going to work in finance in London kind of thing. And they had a friend who he went to Oxford, and he did maths at Oxford, and then he started on 80 grand a year, like straight out of uni. Wow, there's mad money to be made, and people are making crazy money. But if you have this passion and desire, then there's something beautiful about that, though. No,
like,
you know, it's
definitely.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a starving artist, but like, I definitely don't agree that should be the case. Like, you know, I think there's so much value, like, one in good journalism. I think we need good journalism, you know, more than ever now. But even just in any creative act, you know, what do you do when you're not at work? You watch Netflix, you read a book, you look at the paper, like whatever. Like, all of that is drawn from creative work and the work of people who are, you know, underpaid. And I think, without getting too deep into it, I think, you know, a lot of governments in the past haven't valued that. And, you know, there's been funding cuts and all those kind of things. And I think it's very easy to look at budgets and to say, you know, we're saving X amount. But the knock on of that, you know, all those things that haven't been created, all those artists who've had to go and work a different job, I think is really depressing in a way. But I mean, that's the world we live in. So
Yeah, it is. But then it is, as you say, a choice as well. It's how much funding is allocated to the arts, because it is always the first thing to go when budgets are analysed. It's like, what's the first thing we can cut? It's like arts funding. But also, as you say, it's like when you do cut that, what's left? You know, like what? Yeah. The creative act is one of the deepest human instincts and part of the human soul, and it's also what makes us so, you know, everything that's built, like all these microphones and stuff, they came out of somebody's imagination, you know? You know, someone had to create them and build them and design them, and you need a will die on that hill of funding the creative field, because it is just what gives life that, like, color.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, and like, food media is definitely a part of this. You end up with like a body of not everyone, but a lot of people who work in it, unfortunately, are the people who can afford to not earn a lot of money. So they might come from a privileged background, or especially at the lower ends. You know, I talked about unpaid internships and stuff like that. That's a huge thing in publishing initially, or, you know, you work on minimum wage in the centre of London, and who can afford to do that? So, you know, when you cut funding, there might still be output, but there will be a lot less output from working class people, you know, people who don't have, like, own a house they can live in rent free, etc., etc. And I think that's a challenge. But I don't know, it's not all doom and gloom.
No, it's not. What? Yeah. Where is the hope? Where is the optimism? Like, where are the, like, bright sparks, do you think?
I'll speak for food media because that's what I know best. Independent publications are killing it, like online independent publications. The prime example of that is Vittles, which is a Substack. It's not, calling it a newsletter to be a massive disservice. It is an online publication. They started doing print, but it's based in London, run by a guy called Jonathan Nunn, and it pays extremely well. They always reply to pitches, which is not the case for other publications, and they publish food writing that like breaks away from the norm. There's a lot of stuff I like about the intersection of food and identity, food and socioeconomic circumstances. In terms of restaurant reviews, they review places like, you know, a rotisserie chicken vendor on a street corner in Peckham. You know, they're not going to, like, your Michelin star places and that kind of thing. They're really like a voice for It sounds so trite. It's like a voice for the people, but they're publishing the food writing that people in food want to read. Like, you know, I work in a restaurant at the moment, worked in cafes and stuff in the past. That's the thing that people are reading. Vittles is the place that all the food writers want to be published in. And then they encourage a lot of people who aren't food writers, who've never written before, to pitch them and to write for them. And, you know, if you want to write for a national, the first thing they'll look at are, what are your bylines? So it's a lot more accessible than other places. Pellicle is the same. So they're kind of like Vittles, but for beer, drinks, alcohol, wine, that kind of thing. So I've written a few articles for them about the challenges of running community-owned pubs in rural areas, about a brewery in my hometown in Cumbria closing after operating for, you know, over 100 years, like really deep dives. And in terms of like the pros, they let you be really kind of experimental and, you know, imaginative. When you're writing for print magazines and nationals, they'll be like, this is our voice, and write to our voice, which is fair enough because you're being published by them. But it's not as literary as these other ones. So for me, the hope is in those independents. Like, they're showing that there is a way to, one, pay people well, and two, make a business out of publishing the stuff that traditional media often shies away from. Because there's not mass appeal in terms of your everyday reader of a newspaper might not want to read a 2,500 word essay about what it's like to be a delivery rider. But there's obviously a big enough market in the UK, and I think online really helped with this, the fact that online publications, that people who are interested across the UK and beyond can subscribe and read like tremendous journalism for, you know, £40 a year, and know that they're supporting creatives. So that's a real high point. And I also think the move for some publications from print to online has been done well. You look at some papers and they are chasing like an advertising model. And I think, in my opinion, that's almost a race to the bottom, because it's all about how much you can produce. You get a super clicky headline. That's where the clickbait kind of comes from. And then when you click it, you get a million pop-ups, because that's how they make their money. But for example, when I was at the Courier, they are chasing like a subscription model. So instead of having all these pop-ups, they still have a couple ads, but instead of having all these pop-ups and the article being free to read, you get a couple articles free to read a month, and then you have to pay like a £4 a month subscription. And just going for that model versus the advertising model means that you're not chasing like constant output and clicks, you're chasing engagement. And the way to get engagement is to write good quality stories that deliver on the headline. So I think the fact that subscriber models are working is a real, you know, high point, and hopefully more publications as they transition from print to digital will see value in that as well. Because I'm sure everyone's exhausted of, you know, clickbait headlines and a million ads. So I just don't think that's the way to do it.
No, neither do I. That actually kills me. I hate those, as you say, just like the bullshit headline that is vaguely related to the article. That was another thing I didn't realize when I just started freelance writing, was that you often don't actually get to write your own headline.
Yeah.
It's to write the headline, and there was a couple of times that I had headlines written that I almost said, I was like, this is not...
It's too far. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then you can just see, as you say, that just the incentive, it's like a bad incentive of like, we are just going to get somebody to click on this just because there's such a competition for attention that I'm just going to get someone to click on this, and then once they've clicked on it, who cares?
Yeah,
we've given them the pop-ups, we've delivered the ads to them. Who cares whether what they have clicked on is valuable and is honest and is true and is well thought through and is well reported and is well researched, is reliable, is factful, is objective, is all these things. It's like, does not matter. All of it, we got the click, so the rest is secondary.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately a lot of journalists get tarred with the same brush. Like, I know when I work for a regional newspaper, people roll their eyes and go, oh, you're making stuff up or blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, actually, it's really high quality journalism because that's the model we've pursued. But, unfortunately, the people who are writing these stuff, I'm sure they'd love to have the time to, write well thought out articles, but it's an executive level decision that then, if you want to work as a journalist, you're scratching around for staff jobs, you end up working for one of these publications. And I saw, when I was looking at jobs, I saw a journalism job. I think it was advertised like a community journalist, and they were saying they wanted you to write 6 to 8 articles a day, which is just like unbelievable. Even if they're only 300 words long, that is unbelievable. It's never going to be good stuff. At the Courier, I was writing 3 to 4 a week, and honestly, like, I don't think I could have done more without really compromising the quality of what we were doing. It's just not that many stories around, especially for a regional paper. Do you know what I mean? So that's one of the other issues with looking for jobs. It's not just trying to find them. It's also being like, do I actually want to work in a newsroom where it's all about churning stuff out. It's all about getting stuff out there. I'd rather work, and I've been spoiled having worked at the Courier. I'd rather work somewhere where there's, we're thinking about engagement. We're thinking about value to the reader and that kind of thing.
Integrity.
Yes. It's actually on the wall at the Courier. Was it integrity with all the words on the wall? Yeah. Nice. I was so anxious about working there because I'd never worked in a newsroom before. I'd always been freelance, and I kind of pictured it as, like in the Spider-Man movies when he goes into like handing the photographs and everyone's like shouting and screaming and it's all crazy. I was like, this is going to be terrifying, and it's a stressful job. And I was like, if you've top-down pressure to add to that, it's going to be very difficult. But, I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful manager, a wonderful team. And they just kind of let me do my thing, which is so not the case when you're a freelancer. So, yeah.
That's nice. It's good to hear as well. It's good to hear a good experience, and you had a nice time. And
yeah.
Because, you also do hear the horror stories of people that just had, bad management. And I've heard up to like 15 articles a day.
Really?
Before. Yeah, I've heard 15. I mean, that is ludicrous.
Yeah.
How you could possibly... I'm not sure if that is if they're just news writing and they're just taking other people's, other people's quotes and then just making it into copy.
Yeah.
I feel like it must be, because I mean, that is just...
almost like recycling stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then as made me think as well there, journalism has one of the lowest trust ratings of any profession. So it's like, it's down there with... I can't even remember what else is down there, but like when people, if you poll people to ask them, trust in journalism is in the absolute pits. Like, it is so low, and often, as you say, for good reason, because it's like that same pressure you're putting on people to be like, oh, you need to produce 10 articles a day. That's the same thing that gets people saying, oh, allegedly there's might be sources close to the royal family say that blah 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 blah, and there might be this beef here, and it's just it's just made up, and it's just baseless, and there's no evidence, there's no sources, there's nothing that you can actually put a finger on, but you've got a deadline to hit, you need to get something out, and so you just tap away and just produce something at the end of it, which is just such a shame, because it, as you say, it tars all journalists with the same feather, or tars them all with the same paintbrush? With the same brush. And it's such a shame, because journalists should be the most trustworthy people. They are the people, and they are absolutely essential to democracy. They're so much so that they're in the the US Constitution. Is one of the amendments is the freedom of the press. They are the ones that hold power to account and speak truth to power. It was journalists that brought down Richard Nixon at the Wall Street Journal. Some Guardian investigations, the Panama Papers and stuff. Just Spotlight. There were just it is journalists often. They're the ones that point out this. Like, wait a fucking minute. There's something real fishy going on. The Partygate as well, another one that comes to mind. The MP's expenses scandals. All of these things, these are all found out by journalists. These are the people that are the ones, as you say, that are keeping integrity in society. They're holding people to high standards. They're asking the questions that are very, very uncomfortable, but that have to be asked. And yet, on the flip side of that, often I think because of payment models and bad incentives, you also get the absolutely outrageous stuff like the phone hacking scandal that just brings the whole industry into disrepute, which is such a shame.
Yeah, it is, because there's a lot of talented people working very hard to bring these stories to light, and I think like it's difficult to see. I mean, even writing food articles, which a lot of the time they're not that deep. Like it's it's just like a news about a new place opening. It's not that complex, but people are so ready in the comments to dismiss it and say it's rubbish. It's written by AI. It's X, Y, and Z, and it's very difficult to be like. I felt, especially at the Courier, I grew up in a rural area and we had a local paper, and it wasn't great. There wasn't a lot of, partly because there wasn't a lot going on, but there wasn't a lot of great journalism being published in it. And I wanted to shake some of our readers and be like, you're so fortunate to be living in this part of Scotland and receive such in-depth, well thought out journalism. And people are really, really thinking about the things that we write and how we write them and how we present them. But unfortunately, a lot of people, I think because of the reputation of the industry, are so quick to dismiss it. They'll say, you've given this place a bad review because the Courier hates the owner. Or, you've written this article because you want this business to thrive and not another. And it's like, it's really not about that. It's about, telling the truth from my perspective. So yeah, it is an interesting one. But I think, seeing the type of people who have stuck at it, like the journalists still working at it, like they care about what they do, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be a level of people holding themselves accountable, even if the public have kind of checked out in a way. And I see why, because, we live in an age where, something needs to be like controversial to grab attention. And if controversy doesn't exist, then like, yeah, let's just invent it. Like that's the way people think. And, you see it in not just journalism, obviously in politics and all sorts of places, just trying to grab a headline. And that's wrong. I think if there's not a story there, you don't write it. But like you said, everyone's got a target, everyone's got a goal, everyone's got a deadline. So it often ends up that people write it anyway.
Yeah, I get just the drive for engagement is just so toxic sometimes. Another thing is, I sometimes see it as audience capture. So someone will create 10 pieces of content. Mm-hmm. The one piece of content they create that's maybe a little bit controversial or that touches on subjects that are a little bit, I don't know, that open to interpretation or whatever, that'll be the one that gets the most engagement, the most comments, the most likes, the most reshares. Mm-hmm. And then you look at those 10 pieces of content and you're like, whoa, well, that one performed really, really well. Mm-hmm. It was the most controversial. It got the most people to engage on it on social media. Mm-hmm. And so then they go and produce 10 more pieces of content just like that. Yeah. And then before they know it, you just become like a caricature of themselves. And they're saying things. I mean, you can see people online all the time. There was just an interview a couple of days ago that was published between Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson.
Two heavyweights.
The pinnacle. Yeah. And just some of the stuff, there's Candace Owens on when it comes to men. I'm saying these things, I've got to be careful naming names. But, some of the things they say is just, Nick Fuentes, another one. It's just like, I mean, what is going on? Like, how have we got to this stage where it's like just coming up with the most outrageous nonsense? I mean, Emmanuel Macron is suing Candace Owens at the moment for claiming that his wife is a man. It's just like, or was born male, and it's just like, what is going on? Like, how is this journalism? How did we get here?
Yeah, I think it's like, from a food writing perspective, I think the industry's done quite well, because obviously our version of that is write a bad review. Everyone loves a bad review. They love the drama. And also as a writer, like, they are so much fun to write, because it is fun to be like a bit snarky and all that kind of thing. But and at the Courier, generally the things, not always, but the things that do well were bad reviews, because we're just kind of wired that way, I guess. But, we were very, very strict on how many bad reviews we wrote. We were also strict on the type of business we would skewer. If it was, a big chain, they can afford to take a hit more than, your mum and pop shop down the road. and, you know, trying to always be constructive with your criticism. But yeah, the temptation is there. Oh, like, you know, my numbers are down this month. Let's just, you know, find some terrible place and go there and just rinse it. That temptation is always there. And I know Jane Rayner has talked in the past about, you know, his best performing stuff being bad reviews when he was writing for The Guardian. So the temptation is there. But there's a lot of food writers showing that you don't need to do that. Chitra, who writes for The Times Scotland and The Observer, she's known for writing really positive reviews. She does, you know, criticize places, but she writes positive reviews, and her stuff does amazingly. She's a great writer. Her articles are wonderful. And I think, you know, from food writing, we can scratch that itch without, you know, degenerating into, you know, a bit of a cesspit, I guess, which I think a lot of journalism and stuff that's posted on social media is these days. So yeah, I think as a subsection of journalism, we're doing quite well.
Yeah, another thing I was going to say is that there's just so much good stuff out there. If you go looking for there, just Jay Rayner is someone you mentioned, but I love Jay Rayner's work. His articles are just fantastic, so fun to read, so interesting. He's so balanced. He's so if you know, he's gone to a restaurant in London and it's like 30 quid for some, you know, bread at the side. He's calling it out, but which is, and it's fair, like it's fair, and it's right to criticize these kind of things. But at the same time, he's not trying to be controversial.
No, I'd really hope not. I think the vast majority of food writers know that, like, there's only value in their work if they're honest. Like, you know, if you write a review and everything is the best every week, oh, this is the best thing I had, this is the best thing I had, the best thing I've ever eaten, it's going to take 3 weeks for people to work that out and be like, well, I'm just not going to trust this guy because he's just like a PR machine. And then you flip that over, and maybe there is like a small market for this, but if you had someone just slamming place after slamming place, just saying this is terrible, this is shit, blah blah blah, I think people would very quickly be like, you're not serving the industry, and hopefully they check out. So, you know, you want to have a wide range of reviews, and the same for food writing in general. You know, if you're talking about opinion pieces, interviews, just anything really, you want it to be balanced. You want to criticize the industry or a business or a person when they deserve it, but then also support those same businesses, people, etc., if they're doing good, because it's a really, really difficult industry to be in. And I think working in a restaurant now is like, you see that firsthand. You see how much stuff is going on behind closed doors, how difficult it is to make ends meet, etc., etc. And the role, I think, especially of food writers, is to, you know, is to inform and educate and support, and that's pretty much it. And I think if you're just criticizing places, you're not really doing any of that. So yeah.
Are you working in a restaurant now? Behind the scenes?
Yeah. So basically, I was freelance for that period for 3.5 years, and I got offered a 6-month contract at the Courier, which I've kind of talked about a little bit. So I worked there for 6 months, and that ended on Remembrance Day, 11th November. And I could have gone back to freelancing full time, but I mean, money was one thing. We don't live in Delray anymore. We live in Broughton, and it's more expensive, so I need more money. And also having written largely what I'd like to write and the style I'd like to write for the Courier, not having to ask permission for stuff which you have to so much as a freelancer. The idea of going back to freelancing full time just seemed a lot. I've worked in hospitality before, but never in like a proper restaurant. So I saw that James Murray, who used to be the head chef at the Timber Yard, he had a Michelin star there. He also got a Michelin star while working in Hong Kong. He was opening his own place in Leith called Dog Star. So it opened 5 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. And I've been there pretty much the whole time. So I work in the kitchen. I work as a kitchen porter. So during service, I will be cleaning, washing, etc. During like times outside of service, I'll be doing prep. And it's a great opportunity to learn from James and his team. Like, they're all incredible cooks and lovely people, and the kind of positivity surrounding that business. Everyone is trying to do their best, and they're really going the extra mile, where, like, I don't know if you've worked in hospitality before, but I worked in a lot of places where everyone's doing the opposite. They're doing the bare minimum and just trying to get through, to work somewhere where everyone is kind of pursuing that excellence is really inspiring. And it's so difficult when people ask me what I do and I tell them, I feel like their first reaction is like sympathy. There's this guy who's 29 who's doing a job that, a 16-year-old would be qualified to do. And that's one way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other way of looking at it is, I'm working under like one of the best chefs in Scotland, if not the UK, like literally next to him every day. I'm seeing how the kitchen works. I'm learning how to cook properly, and like learning just so much more about food and restaurants and that whole industry. I think it makes sense. I think it's worthwhile, regardless of whether I end up chefing full time or I go back to writing full time. I'm not really sure, but I feel like the two kind of inform each other. Whether I'm, a writer who cooks or a cook who, writes, I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, there's still those days where you look at it as like, oh God, like, is this what I'm doing? But then, yeah, other days you wake up and think, God, I'm so lucky to be doing this. During the middle of service when we've got like a packed restaurant and there's like world-class food just like firing past at you. Yeah, man.
So sick.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. And like we've had people from national newspapers come in to review it, and I'd be like, I know that person, and the feedback on Google reviews and stuff has been amazing. People often try and like, poke their head into the kitchen and say, oh, it's the best thing I've ever eaten. And there is so much kind of to be found in that, to be enjoyed in that. And there's also something to be said for not being in your head all day. Like, I might be thinking about a lot of things, but at work, like I'm kind of using my hands. You can kind of enter that kind of state where you're not very conscious of what you're doing. So I feel like even though like physically I'm very tired, when I come home, the next morning, mentally, I feel like I could write for hours, which is what I'm doing. So I'm writing during the day and working during the evening. And at the moment it's working. But yeah, there's definitely a part of your ego, which, you go from like your dream job and your good salary to, standing by a dishwasher every day. It's difficult to square yourself with that. But I think it's making me kind of a better writer and a better person. So that's kind of rewarding in its own way.
I think that's sick, man. I really respect that. Because, I've often thought of that about working in the physical realm. A lot of what I do just now is just all knowledge work.
Yeah.
And sometimes or often it just becomes it's just so mentally exhausting.
Yeah.
But I've also found when I've been doing, so I was a landscape gardener for a few years. I worked on fishing boats when I was like painting fishing boats, which was good, hard, like physical work outdoors. But there is something about that balance. There's like a dichotomy between working physically, and then that also bleeds into being able to, create good writing.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really, really important. And I think maybe for restaurant work in particular, like to not romanticize the work. I mean, you have so many like documentaries, TV series like The Bear. And like The Bear is like, it's quite true to life, whatever. But like all of them paint this kind of idea that to be a chef, you have to like, you're super passionate and you love your job all the time. And it's really rewarding and it can be all those things. But at the end of the day, it's like extremely hard work. And just because someone works in a kitchen, not everyone does that because they love it. Some people don't have any other options. They've done it their whole life and they're kind of stuck in it. And I do find like, I said that, people's first reaction when I tell them I'm a kitchen porter is sympathy. If I just say, oh, I work in a restaurant, so I work in a kitchen, so many people are like, oh, that must be amazing. It must be this, it must be that. And it can be all those things, but like, it's also brutal, man. Like, the guys I'm working with, I'm working between 40 and 50 hours a week. They are working considerably more. And the kind of attention to detail and the stress that they're under it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And, I'm kind of romanticizing it in a way now because you can't help but admire it. But equally, like, I don't know, I think a lot of my friends, especially in London, like, oh, maybe I might just like quit my job and go work in a kitchen. And I'm like, that is not something that you should do lightly. It's not like what you see on TV. A lot of it is a slog and it's brutal. But like you said, there's also a lot of power in it. And I think the fact that I have creative projects on the side it's really easy to see value in both of them. I think if all I was doing was working at the pot wash, I'd find it very difficult, because you're kind of like, what am I building towards?
Yeah.
One answer would be, you're building towards being a cook, being a chef, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. But I'm much more comfortable in that, not knowing, being like, well, I've got all these other projects I'm working on and they're going great, because, I'm working hard during the day. I'm kind of experiencing all these crazy things because I've worked there for 5 weeks. The amount of tales that I kind of have in my brain of like stuff I've seen is just, it is an absolute, wonder how much life is packed into that room, from the staff, from like things that go wrong with the equipment to, customers. Like there's so much drama there. It is just beautiful. And to kind of be able to channel that into my creative work is really, really great. So I feel like I'm in a good position now. But yeah, we'll see how long it lasts. I hope it lasts for a while. But then again, if the Courier came calling and said, "Oh, we have an opening," it would be very difficult to turn down, a good salary, a good pension. But I do think there's a lot to be said for food writers working in the industry and working at a level in the industry, because, and this is no criticism, there's exceptional writers who haven't worked in restaurants and they know a lot about food, but kind of the level below that, you have a lot of people who might have got into journalism writing about something else, and because they're in the newsroom, they've ended up writing about food and they haven't taken that time to educate themselves. And when you're passing judgment, especially if you're reviewing, you can make or break a business, or at least make it very difficult for them if you give them a bad review. And I think people writing about food, they have a duty to know what they're writing about. And that sounds very obvious, but you have to be able to draw the distinction between like opinion and fact. I remember seeing, I don't know what paper it was in, but it was in a national, and this food writer criticized a bakery for using day-old croissants to make their almond croissants. But that is the practice. That's how you make an almond croissant. You take the old one, you fill it with the almond filling, you rebake it, and there, away you go. And this person, obviously they didn't know any better, but like, in a way, that's not an excuse. Like, it's your job to know that and to not criticize someone for doing the right thing. Do you know what I mean? There's some things that are obvious when you review a place, like obviously if the food's the wrong temperature, if the service is terrible, if it's, super salty. But if you don't like something, that doesn't mean it isn't good. And I think that's where the knowledge comes in. It's like, why don't I like this? Is that because it's a failing of the restaurant? Or is it my palate? Or is it, how I'm feeling today and all that kind of thing? In an ideal world, you'd work somewhere like the New York Times, where, you visit somewhere multiple times before you review it. And if you want to give them, somewhere recently got 4 stars, which is the highest rating. And that very rarely happens in the New York Times. And the lady who wrote it, she said before she gave the 4-star rating, she ate at the restaurant multiple times, but she also ate at like numerous restaurants that offered the same thing in New York to use as a comparison. So you're talking about like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then obviously
crazy depth, man.
Yeah,
kind of research is unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly, because they have the budget to do it, and they're seen as like the authority in that restaurant scene. So that's the ideal. I don't know if any paper in the UK can challenge that. And if you're only visiting once, obviously it's a much more narrow snapshot into the restaurant. But also, I think if you're only visiting once, it kind of relies on you, the writer, like knowing your shit. Because if you don't, and you criticize it for something that, ends up being your opinion, that it's wrong when it's not, that can really, really damage them. So I think, there's a duty to either educate yourself by reading and eating and immersing yourself in that, or, you can kind of bypass all that by working in restaurants, and then you kind of see it firsthand and you're like, shit, like there's a lot that goes into this, and, this is why people do it this way and this is why they do it that way. So it definitely informs my writing. It's very interesting because I actually haven't had anything published since I started working there. I've pitched a few things, but they didn't get picked up. But I'm really interested in kind of, when I do get commissioned, to sit down and write something and then maybe compare it to the stuff I've written in the past. And I think it's going to be a lot more knowledgeable and maybe a little bit more compassionate as well, which I think is a good thing.
So you think it's enhanced your ability to review and to write about food?
I really hope so. Yeah, I think reviewing it will like directly translate into like improving my writing. But to be honest, I didn't do a great deal of reviewing until I worked at the Courier. I kind of avoided that world. It's not the kind of food writing that I enjoy the most.
What is?
Um, Long form stuff. I like looking at like the social cultural impacts of food. So like talking about the pub, running community owned pubs in rural settings that I wrote for Pellicle. I really, really enjoyed that article because I'd seen so many national newspapers write about community ownership, and it is always in the positive light. Like rural towns save their pub, rural towns save their shop, and there is so much to be said for community ownership. But I grew up in a very rural place with a community-owned pub, and I know for a fact that running it was a very difficult, stressful situation.
Had exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know exactly.
I don't want to say it tore the town apart because that's not true. But like there was friction. Yeah,
The beef was insane. The
exactly.
community bought the pub, and it was just like, it was like, people aren't pulling away. We should knock through this wall. Oh no, that wall shouldn't have been knocked down. I was like, what do you mean? Like, it still is. It's still just a small. There's something about small communities though that they are just.
Yeah.
And also when the majority of the population are over the age of about 60 and have started to retire, they don't have a lot on, so then they're just like,
there's a lot of time for stuff to become an issue. But yeah, like it was very rewarding to kind of be like, well, I'm reading a lot of stuff, and none of it is reflecting like my lived reality. Like I know this thing is happening. So my case study for the article was my local pub. So it's that kind of thing where I'm kind of delving kind of a bit deeper than maybe a lot of food writers are able to because of who they're writing for. Independents love a super specific angle because they have a super specific readership. You could get stuff in Pellicle, you can write about the history of a certain hop and people love it because, that's their life. They love beer. They love that. You would never get that published in the Times because people don't care. They want to know like the top 10 pubs to visit in Devon or something like that. And that's not a criticism. They're just two very different forms of writing. And I find myself drawn to the in-depth stuff a lot more. So yeah, that's the stuff I love to do. I've grown to enjoy restaurant reviewing more. But when I was at the Courier, my favorite kind of stuff to do if I had to review somewhere was something that we called a taste test. So it's not a formal review. The restaurant or the business know you're coming. You interview them, you talk about their story, you talk about their food, and then you try some of their dishes. So it's more of like a well-rounded view of the business and the people behind it, not just I visited this restaurant, tried X, Y, and Z, and went on my merry way. So yeah, I think there's definitely, for me, describing food obviously is a huge part of food writing. But the value for me is in the stories and people behind it. And that sounds a little bit lame to say because so many people would say that. But the best part of my job at the Courier was, I'd interview 4 or 5 people a week. And I feel like you interviewing people, like people come out with some amazing things. And it's just wonderful to be around that. And even if you disagree with them, to be like, oh, like I wouldn't do it that way. I feel like I learned so much during those 6 months just because I interviewed so many interesting people. So that's the stuff I really value. Unfortunately, that can be the hardest stuff to land as a freelancer because it's more specific. So you have to kind of build relationships with editors to the point where they will trust you. And I've got a couple editors that I think see me in that light. If I pitch them something slightly left field, I can say, oh, like, go on, trust me. Yeah. And they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll trust this. Yeah, exactly. But for the nationals, no, they're not going to have it. They want either like a very like fresh angle on a familiar topic or just like a more of a roundup kind of thing. There are some publications that are doing slightly different things. I think the Financial Times are doing really great work in food and drink. But the vast majority, if you're not writing a review, you kind of have to be fairly straight shot, fairly self-explanatory because it's got to have wide appeal. And that's, again, they're trying to hit their readership, hit their targets. I'm sure some editors would love to commission super specific work. But their job is to get reads. So I can understand that.
Yeah. What service are you trying to provide to your reader? What are you trying to do for them?
It depends what kind of article I'm writing, but generally I'm either trying to, engage them, to provide interest, something that I think a lot of my work I try and be funny, not in like a trying too hard way, but I think like a quippy line or a interesting description goes a long way, especially if you're writing for a newspaper. Like the Courier, they do a lot of news, a lot of local news, a lot of court cases. So you click on the homepage and it will be like lorry pile up on this road, pedophile convicted for, pedophilia. And business closes, it's a lot of doom and gloom because that's what news is.
Yeah.
There's very rarely positive news in newspapers. But that's where lifestyle comes in, So the lifestyle journalists, we try and bring that color and that enjoyment to the reading experience. So yeah, you might read about the horrific lorry pileup that's left 4 people in hospital and go, oh gosh, that's, ruined my weekend. So you turn to, the lifestyle section where you might read about someone recovering from cancer or a case study on someone who's converted their home, or if you're reading about food, a new business that's open, someone's won an award, like this individual has done an amazing thing. So I think first and foremost, my job is to kind of bring that enjoyment and that light for most of my articles, unless I'm being critical. And then the other aspect is I want to kind of educate people. So that can be about, how a thing is made, but it could also be like educate them about this place that's opened and I went to review. And, should you or should you not go there, in my opinion? So yeah, I want to educate people. I want them to enjoy it. And apart from that, I think I want people to kind of like engage with it a bit on a deeper level. I like people to, food is something that we all have a relationship with. So people might check out our politics. They might, check out our business coverage. But I think everyone eats. Everyone has to eat. A lot of people eat out. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. So
almost around cooks as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of engagement and a lot of strongly held opinions around food, which I kind of invite. Like that's my job to kind of add to that discussion. But yeah, I want people to kind of engage with it and say, if they disagreed, like say why. Say, oh, I don't agree with you putting down this place because I went on Friday and I had the best lunch of my life, or whatever it is. So I try to invite that kind of engagement. And again, writing for the Independents, it is so easy because the readership is so passionate. Like going back to that community pub piece, I received a lot of feedback, like not all of it positive, but like it's not negative criticism, it's constructive. Like, oh, I disagree because, in Maine, we have this place and it is blah, 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 blah. So I do feel like food has great potential to kind of unlock discussions, and sometimes like reading the comment threads that kind of come off it is just hilarious, or it can be really rewarding because, you write about, a type of cake that someone's grandma used to make or something, and people engage with that, and, that triggers like a deep memory. So that's a wonderful thing about being a food writer. Unfortunately, a lot of the kind of feedback is negative in a way that doesn't engage with the actual content. And like a lot of criticisms on like your appearance. People haven't even read the article. Just like if people criticize my writing, I'm like, fair enough, because like my writing is like, you judge me on that.
Yeah.
But a lot of, I'm not even gay, but like homophobic comments, and a lot of the women got comments about, their appearance or their size or stuff like that. We wrote we covered a lady called Beth who bought a pub restaurant near Dundee, and it had failed. It's a very, very well-known building, and she took it over, and she used to be an OnlyFans model, and that's how she made her money. And the article we wrote was about what she plans to do with the space, and she'd worked there before. She had all this kind of brilliant ideas, and then you go to the comments, and it's just loads of people. I'm assuming men, just making lewd comments about OnlyFans, and is it a restaurant with rooms and all this kind of shit. And you're like criticize her for her choice of menu, not what she used to do as a career. Like, one, it's not your place to judge, but two, it's got nothing to do with this thing. So yeah, it is difficult. But yeah, most of the stuff as a freelancer, it tends to get more constructive or thoughtful comments as opposed to just, your glasses are stupid. Like, that's the kind of level of stuff we're talking about, bro. So yeah, I mean, you've got to have a thick skin if you're going to be a journalist. That's just the fact of the matter.
Yeah. You got to learn that early on as well.
Yeah, and it's difficult.
It is, because people can be mean. Like, don't say. I mean, I love your glasses, by the way. But yeah, oh man, and I often remind myself when you do get people commenting like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you saw the context that they're coming from, you would just be like, why did I give them a second of my time?
Mm-hmm.
It's just who is taking the time to leave a shitty comment about, as you say, someone who is making money in a way that it's just none of your business, It's like who is gonna, what kind of person does that?
Yeah, and I think the thing I noticed a lot recently is, like, a few years ago, those kind of comments would come from like troll accounts or like burner accounts or whatever, but like it would just be like some random dude from his like Facebook just saying like this horrible stuff, and it's just I don't know. Like, I've kind of checked out of social media. I know we've been messaging on Instagram, but like I don't have it on my phone. I've deleted Facebook from my phone.
Neither do I, actually. So I specifically downloaded it to message you.
But that's the thing. And working in the restaurant has allowed me to do that. When I was working at the Courier, you're always looking at stories. Stories, a lot of the time, food businesses announce stuff on Instagram, so I had to be on Instagram. But it's been nice to kind of, it's nice to kind of take that break from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's wild the stuff people say on a public profile. Like, it's crazy. I feel like it's a real race to the bottom with social media at the moment. And I think, like, I know obviously you've had Chris on, he's done like really great stuff with his Instagram, and the temptation is like, oh, if I put the work in, maybe it would like, supercharge my career. And I think for food writing, like, there are so many people who have got cookbook deals without ever having written an article because they've got Instagram famous, and that's fair enough. But I think after a few years of like thinking about it and kind of dipping my toe in and then coming back out, I've kind of realized that avenue is just not for me. So it's quite nice just to be like, I'm just going to step away from it while I can. And if I need to have it on my phone because I end up working at staff somewhere, then I'll do that. But at the moment, I'm enjoying not being a part of that world because it just doesn't feel like a place I want to engage with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I get pulled between, I think I spoke to Chris about this as well, get pulled between the two parts of like social media. Is such a part of life now. Everyone uses it, as you say, news breaks there. If I want to stay on top of what's happening, then I kind of feel like I need to use certain platforms. But then the flip side of that is that I'll be, especially using like X or something, where you just get, it is just an absolute, like, we see just terrible things, people saying terrible things, people just having intense, thoughtless, angry disagreements. And it's just like, what is the point? And then I find myself like clicking through all the threads to say, oh yeah, what did they say? What did they say? And then suddenly I'm about something that I couldn't care less about. I'm suddenly like having an emotional reaction a little bit, and I think my cortisol's spiked a little bit, and it's like, what is this? This is just like a digital little screen that I have in my life that is just, and I say that as somebody who is now trying to produce content for, that's one thing I like about like podcasting and longer form interviews, is that one, there's space for nuance, there's space for, I think you know, by this point, you've kind of lost all those people that might leave a stupid comment about your glasses.
Yeah.
I don't think they're consuming like stuff like this. I think you've lost most of them.
Yeah.
They might see the reels, but that's one of the things I like about the kind of, because you touched on that about the independent versus the national. The audiences are different, and what people are looking for and the kind of stuff people are consuming. I love long form feature articles. I think it's a beautiful art form, and it's just, I am one of the audience. I love long form interview podcasts as well. And I like the kind of audiences that they attract.
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons that I've kind of chosen to go down this path. But I can see that I am also just like feeding into that a little bit, kind of feeding the algorithm. And then at the same time as well, there is such a strong impulse to just go for the clicks as well. Like there's a couple of people I've been considering messaging just because I know if I have them on, it will pop off online. I know that if I make the clips from, regardless really of what they say, I just know because of who they are, and I'm pretty sure I could have them on. But then I stop myself and I'm like, but do I actually care about why they are contentious? Is this something that I actually want to talk about? Or do I want to talk to them, or am I just doing it for, again, the bad incentive?
Yeah, I think it all speaks to like what you want to achieve. And I think, everyone wants to be successful. They want to have, in your scenario, loads of listeners and a super popular podcast, but like at what cost?
Exactly.
Like you want it, well, I'm kind of speaking for you, but I assume you want it to be like a kind of reflection on people you find interesting and like considered conversation, not just, throwing fuel on like a bonfire.
So like on the culture wars, just diving straight in head first.
Exactly. And like, if people, that is their goal for some people, then, fair enough, go for it. But like,
why?
I mean,
why is that someone's goal?
Because I think it's very difficult, but there's a lot of pressure to be successful, full stop. And I think, how you measure success obviously varies, but a lot of people measure it in terms of fame or, like clout or whatever. And as we talked about, the way to get that is like controversy. You just like fucking mainline it, and then you'll get attention. But I don't think, for me, like success is garnering attention.
What do you think success is?
I think I'd really like to be respected by my peers. I think when people, it's lovely when people say, oh, I really enjoyed reading your article. I mean, that never gets old. But, when it's like, a food writer or like a writer you respect, or someone who knows the game, like a journalist, says, oh, I really liked what you did here, and they can get like pinpoint something that you're really proud of but might go over an average person's head. I find that super, super rewarding. And I think like just writing, finding time to write, making writing a part of my life, regardless of whether, I get to do it all day because it's my job, or whether I work in a kitchen and carve out time to write. I think sitting down and writing, multiple times a week or whatever it ends up being, is a form of success, because I really love it. Like I love the process of writing, whether it's journalism or fiction. I just find it very, very worthwhile, and I've kind of got no hesitation in saying like I would write if I could never publish it. I would just write for myself. And I think just having something that is intrinsically just like very, very important. I've never even questioned why writing is important to me. I just know it's really important. I just know when I do it, even if it goes terribly, like there's so much value in that for me. So yeah, just doing that, finding time to do it, because it is a time consuming process, is success in itself, I think.
That's beautiful, man. That really resonates as well, because it is like there's a guy called Rick Rubin who's like he helps people. Yeah, do you know who he is?
He has his taste is what he's known for.
Yeah, exactly. But one of his philosophies is that he creates. He says that you need to completely forget the audience, essentially, and he says that he has never changed one note because he thought other people would want it to change. His point is that you create purely for yourself. You create something that you are proud of, that you want to create, that comes from within, and then he says that is how you produce. That is how you produce creative work that is worthwhile and valuable.
Yeah, and I think that is a constant source of conflict when, I mean, even in fiction, like you are in a way writing a book and thinking like, could this be published? And then once you start thinking about that, you think, well, what's kind of popular at the moment, or like how is a reader going to receive this? But you have to be very careful to kind of nip that in the bud, because you're kind of writing for the result. And this, like, I don't know how much we're going to dive into it, but going into like AI.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so
Curious about your perspective.
yeah, so AI, like just in fiction, there's so many people that are like, oh, I have this really great idea, but I don't have time to write it, so I'm just gonna do ChatGPT. But like that's the wrong, like they're writing, in my mind anyway, to have the finished project, to have potentially have it published. But you know, like, ideas are like 10 a penny. It's in the writing of it that is the love and like the pain and the value and everything about writing, you know, shock is in the writing. Like that's where it is. That's the thing. And of course, like it would be amazing to have a published book and to have people read your work, but like that is all kind of secondary. Like if you want to write, like write, that's it. And I think AI is kind of seen as this like, I think people are loath to say like AI wrote my book, but people are using it as like a shortcut. And like, of course, like I see the temptation when you're like banging your head against a wall, like no matter what it is that you're writing, you just can't find the right thing. But like, that's the good bit, even if it doesn't feel like it. That's what writing is. Like every writer you ever hear speak honestly about writing will say, you know, it's brutal. Like I doubt myself every day. It's so difficult. But like that's the value of it. Like that's why people in my mind do it. So I just don't think that, you know, writing to be published, writing, you know, in a way which like sees a machine do most of the work, it just doesn't, like, for me it's not writing, it's something different. It's creating a product, perhaps. If you're just thinking like, oh, I'm gonna write a rom-com because they're popular, or this is in the zeitgeist right now, so I'm going to try and focus on that. If you actually are writing it, it's probably going to be out the zeitgeist by your done, because it's going to take you, you know, years to get this thing done. So that's one, that's a bad way to go. But two, like, it might be published, it might even be successful, but like if you don't like it, you don't respect it, you haven't put the work into it, like what is the point? Yeah. You know, like if I said, Ross, you could have like an award-winning podcast with 1 million listeners from tomorrow, but you actually don't do this, you just kind of upload files that are sent to you by a machine, like what's the point? Exactly. So yeah, in that regard, I don't rate it. In journalism, AI is becoming very common in terms of efficiency. People are using it, and it's a fine line. I don't see an issue with like spell check, stuff like that, grammar checking. You can put your style guide into a AI machine and it will check things for you against that style guide. I think that's fine, but I think it's when it starts generating ideas that, or generating copy, that I don't agree with. And every publication at the moment has their own way of doing things when it comes to AI. But I'm not a fan of it personally. I think AI has a place in some sectors, but I don't think creative areas should be using it, in my opinion. I know people will disagree with me, but like I've talked about, being creative is in the act of creating, not in the, you know, selling of the thing or the honing of the thing. It is actually creating the thing. So I don't really think it has a place. In journalism, you're looking at, you know, in future you could have all sorts of articles written by AI, especially like court summaries. Like that is very newsy. Not to like discredit news writers, it is a skill. I definitely could not do it. The guys at the Courier were amazing, the way they kind of talked about these horrific things in very impartial, specific language.
It's a real skill.
It is a real skill. And it's also taxing because they're writing about difficult things. But that stuff is very prone to AI. If a company wants to make efficiencies in terms of writing, I think that's the first place it'll look. Production side as well. If you have a print team that organize all the layout, that could all be AI. I think lifestyle, because we put more of ourselves into the article, that's our job, to bring color, to bring perspective, and a lot of it is, especially with food, like we've talked about, an opinion. I think for the most part we tend to be relatively safe, but it's just making a difficult industry even more difficult. And I'd really like to see some legislation come into place. People in the guild have talked a lot about how AI is affecting recipe creators. I don't personally create recipes, but I've heard like obviously it scrapes the internet and steals recipe ideas and amalgamates them, which one is completely wrong because writers should always be paid for their work.
That's why you have copyright law.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, we've just kind of let AI run wild. I remember I was driving to work one day and I listened to an interview about it, and the guy defending it said we want the UK to be a leader in AI for the job, so we can't kind of create loads of legislature to slow it down. We just let it go, and then we'll bring it back. But obviously, that's in my mind, that's not the way you control something like that. But another issue with AI is that after scraping all these things, if you Google a recipe like chicken korma or whatever, you'll often get a recipe in the AI summary box, and you don't actually have to click the article. And a lot of recipe writers who self-publish live off ads. That's why when you click on a recipe blog, often you have to scroll a lot to get to the recipe because there's ads everywhere. So if you don't click their article, they don't get paid, but you're still cooking their recipe. And I know people have very mixed opinions on how they should, find their recipes. And I think cookbook sales are real low at the moment. A lot of people aren't finding value in them, but it is wrong to take someone's recipe that they've designed and developed and agonized over and to not pay for it in some way, whether that's buying a book or reading it from their blog. People, we all do it. We just Google recipes and someone's copy and pasted a recipe from a recipe book and it's on the website, but it is a conscious decision whether you do that or not. And I think AI just adds another layer to that, where it's just so easy to steal stuff. And for people who put time and money into these things to not get paid for their work, which is just wrong. And I don't know, like personally, I'm a huge fan of cookbooks. I feel like there's so many things I've cooked just because I have the books that I would never cook normally, which I think is great because otherwise you just end up in this rut. But yeah, I think as a whole, food writing is relatively safe from AI, safe as it can be at the moment, apart from the recipe developers, and I think they're in a real pickle. Similar to photographers, I think, when you can generate images, why commission a freelancer when you can just, create something like that? And there's loads of reasons why not. But obviously from an executive level, a lot of companies aren't thinking about that. They just want efficiency. And I just don't agree with that. And, not to bang this drum too many times, but the independents I work with, they often hire illustrators at a tremendous rate. And they're so much better for it because there's so much beauty in a visual representation of your story. I normally, I'm commissioned to photograph alongside my articles. I did it at the Courier. For the stuff I do freelance, the long form stuff, I often take portraits or images of restaurants myself. But I'm really looking forward to the day when I publish something and they hire, I think specifically an illustrator to create like a visual representation of my work. I think that would be really, really amazing. And again, I think it's a shame that everyone is just thinking about the bottom line. I know why they are, because it's a difficult industry at the moment, but like I said, there's publications that are making it work. So I think more people should look to them.
Yeah, they're so difficult.
Mm-hmm. I feel like AI is a topic that, outside of like, what's your best restaurant in Edinburgh? AI is like the second thing I'm asked about when I say I'm a food writer. I say, where do you like to eat? And then what's happening with AI. And a lot of people are worried about it. And we're all being told like it's just like it's not going to replace jobs, it's just going to change jobs. But obviously that's not very reassuring to a lot of people. Especially, I have a lot of sympathy for the older journalists who have had to transition from print to digital, because that's a huge change. You're talking about media. Obviously it's changed over the years in many ways, but it stayed in print for so long. That was the way it was done. And then to live through that kind of upheaval and be like, oh my God, if I have to be a journalist, it's not about being in print anymore. It's about being digital, and, the type of content you create changes because of that. And and they've had to go through all that and learn all that. And I have, colleagues in the past who've talked about how difficult that was. And then now, a few years after they've made that leap, they're now being told you have to incorporate X, Y, and Z from AI, or, AI might take this role and you're going to have to move across to something else. And it's very difficult. You can't help but get a bit existential about it when that kind of thing is being said to you, especially when, from my experience, the writers and the photographers and the illustrators don't really want anything to do with it. It's a top-down decision for a lot of these publications. And yeah, that's challenging, especially when it kind of feels like you're feeding the machine that's going to replace you. I think a lot of people, that they're like, we have an AI machine at this publication or whatever, and everything we write educates this machine. What's the end result of that? It's a very, very clever machine for this specific thing.
You're gonna dig in your own grave.
Exactly. And I think there's this kind of misconception that I'm definitely not an expert on AI, but I think there's this misinterpretation that it's creating things. But from my understanding, it's just scraping loads of stuff and then just mashing it together and recycling stuff. So I think it's difficult to be I'm creating stuff, which, like you said, is going to kind of result in my own job being made redundant or whatever. So yeah, I'm thankful to be in the food writing aspect of it, but definitely not a fan of AI in creative spaces. And I think there definitely needs to be something done about it. There's gonna be all these awards and stuff, the food writing awards, journalism awards, novel awards, whatever. They all have we do not accept AI generated work. But there's got to be, if there hasn't been already, there's going to be awards won or books published that have been used with AI. And I think that's wrong, but also I think, if, for example, you take a novelist, when they do the rounds of their literary festivals and they're talking about their creative process, if they outsource that process, people are going to know. And I think the one thing that does make me feel confident about kind of the issues facing AI is that so many creatives are kind of united in this, let's just take a minute kind of front, because, it's a slippery slope. Once one person starts being replaced, why not replace this person and this role and that role and that role and that role? And I think everyone's aware of that. So I think it's kind of nice to see illustrators, photographers, writers, journalists, everyone just kind of be a bit we need to really think about this before we make it the norm.
In fact, to say it's still relatively new. It's still not very well integrated, and it's not everywhere. We're in 5 years' time. What do you think? What do you think is because it's possible, as you're saying, that you just get. I don't know if there's much demand. I don't know. Is honestly, I'm not sure. It's really hard to tell. One of my friends wrote her dissertation about AI in journalism, and it seems that people kind of are very suspicious of it, and they want publications to be saying, yeah, we use AI, whether they do or don't. But I've seen photographs in newspapers at the bottom of a column of text, and it's if there's anything else I can do, if I can do this or X, Y, Z, can I?
I mean, what is the copy editor do?
No, exactly. Yeah, nobody subbed it. Yeah, they just copy and paste it and send it to print. Absolutely outrageous.
I know.
So yeah, I do wonder. It's do people, because if you read the BBC News app, most of the articles won't have a byline.
Mm-hmm.
So I completely see how that just needs to be objective, factual, without personality and even a human touch. Really, you just want factual information that's objective. I can completely see how that. And maybe in some ways, I can do that job better.
Yeah.
That was one thing when I started my journalism degree. I would have quite liked to be a news writer.
Yeah.
But then ChatGPT came out, and I just kind of realised that is just to try to then make a career out of that was just
makes it even more difficult.
Exactly. I'm just I don't want to be scraping, fighting against automation. You know, it's like, yeah, I just didn't. It just wasn't going to happen. So if for news round, definitely I can see how it will replace, but hopefully it creates more space for people like yourself who, as that the human experience becomes even more valuable and more important, and taste and opinion, and because AI writing is soulless, you know, it is so dry and bland and dull and boring, and as soon as I sense that something has been written by AI, I just immediately stop reading it. I just have no interest in it because it's not from the human experience.
Yeah, and I think writing has been quite fortunate in that regard, that people, like, if people comment, this has been written by AI, obviously that's not a compliment. People are criticizing the work, whether it's been written by AI or not. They'll say, you know, that's used as a criticism. But, you know, looking at how it's been adopted in like all those like images that people will share on their social media that's been generated by AI, or videos or stuff, like, that worries me, because there's a reason these companies are seen as being so valuable, and that's because people around the world are using them. And, you know, this is probably quite sad, but like, my hope is that over time that bubble will burst in a way. People will say, you know, it's just slop, which a lot of it is. Like, even if it's done well, like they don't have 7 fingers or whatever, you know what I mean? People will still see that it's soulless. But I remember, I think it was last year when there's so many AI images being published by like companies and stuff like that. That really worries me, because, you know, if you're using AI for that, like, creatives are losing out on work. And I don't think we've seen like widespread adoption in terms of writing yet, and like we have with visual media, which is really great. And I kind of hope before that even really happens, the bubble kind of bursts and people realize it's just this empty, dry regurgitation. It's not writing. Like you said, it doesn't have an opinion. The worrying thing is, you know, you see those kind of like AI actors, if they create like AI journalists, so they create a journalist that has these kind of views and these kind of opinions, and then they get them to write like opinion pieces. That's like a very almost like dystopian thing that I could see happening. You know, people have relationships with AI chatbots. They obviously can feel a connection to those machines. I just really hope that publications don't start doing that, because obviously the attraction is you can have as many columns as you'd like. You know, they could write a column every day and you never have to pay them. You just have to pay your subscription to ChatGPT or whatever. So the attraction in terms of financial savings is obviously there, but you've got to have some integrity. Like, you can't do that, in my opinion. That's just fundamentally wrong on so many levels. But, you know, I've got skin in the game, so obviously I'm going to lean the opposite way. There might be other people that would be very happy to read columns from or articles written by AI journalists. But yeah, I think it's difficult, having gone through like most people, like early adulthood, being like, what do I want to do, and really worrying that you're never going to find like a job that you think is rewarding or purposeful or whatever. And having like found that job, and now I've been like, oh, you have the good fortune to be working in this job at a time when, you know, it's kind of under attack from all these things. But, you know, I have trust in our society that we're not going to allow that kind of thing to happen, and I hope that's the case. And even if it's not the case, there will always be publications that will reject AI writing and imagery, etc., etc. I firmly believe there'll always be a market for that, and it all might be a narrower market, but like, the market's small already. So, you know, if you're surviving at the moment and you're good at what you do, I think hopefully you'll be able to do that in the future. But yeah, we shall wait and see. Honestly, I thought about it a lot about a year ago, and it's probably not great, but I try not to think about it too much anymore, because that's always going to be my stance. And what businesses decide to do, what governments decide to do, is way, way above me. You know, maybe in the future, if, you know, I wrote a book or I had a column at a newspaper or something, I had some kind of presence, then I would really stand up and say that. And this is my platform at the moment, and I'm kind of saying that. But until I can affect, like a big change, I don't see the point in agonizing over it because it is scary. So yeah, I'd rather just focus on why I write, enjoy writing, and just let everyone else work out what they want to do with it. And I have boundaries that I'm not going to cross, and it's all well and good to say that if I'm in a job where someone tests those boundaries, that's going to be, the proof of the pudding, whether I stand up for it or not. And I really hope I do in that scenario. But only time will tell. It's easy to be hardline when you've got nothing to lose. Yeah, we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. The one thing as well, working in the restaurant, like, there has never been a better time to learn a trade or like a skill.
Honest, the tradies will win. The tradies are sorted.
Exactly. So I think if James teaches me how to cook well, then if it all goes to shit, I'll just cook and write on the side. And that's my backup. And cooking is rewarding in its own way. So that's the backup plan.
I hope. I think surely. I have hope as well. I do have faith in people. I do think that people will always choose the human creative output over the artificial intelligences. I do think there's something sacred and beautiful about as I said earlier, the human capacity to create things. And I do think that people will continue to choose to lean into that. I think obviously that it has already significantly disrupted the industry, but
yeah,
I do have faith that people will continue to choose human created output rather than AI created.
Yeah, I think the only worry is that you hope people will always be able to distinguish between the two, and that relies on people telling the truth. And I think that's why you need to hold individuals and companies responsible, not for publishing AI content, which they're free to do, but labeling it as not AI content. I think that is the real key aspect, because without that, and if AI gets to a point where it can write in this human way, then we are in trouble if people can't tell the truth. I think in that respect, you kind of come to the point where you're going to have to prove that you're a human writing it. But if you can't prove you're a human by taking a photo or a video, you're gonna have to meet every reader. Do you know what I mean? So that's the worrying thing. But yeah, I think it should be fine.
Yeah. Why is it food that you choose to write about? Why does food?
Good question. So when I wrote that opinion piece, obviously that was never to do about food. That was to do about photography, which is another kind of passion of mine. So when I had finished all my modules, I had the whole summer to write my dissertation, and I had moved to Bristol. This is during COVID. It was the whole eat out to help out kind of middle bit. So the world felt kind of normal-ish. And I was writing my dissertation. It was, I don't know why I chose it. It's a very kind of not me topic. It was about race, class, and gender differences in the experiences of climate change, which sounds very interesting, but there was a lot of statistics involved. And it was quite dry. Writing for sports science was extremely dry. You have to write in a scientific manner. Writing my dissertation was kind of a level up from that, but you're still writing academia. So it's very it has to be written in a certain way. And having kind of got this itch to write, and not knowing anything about writing fiction, so I couldn't really go into that whole world. I was I really just want to write something that isn't my dissertation while I'm doing my dissertation. And the two things I felt I knew something about was food, because I've been very fortunate in my upbringing. My parents have always grown vegetables. We live in the countryside. We had chickens. We ate very well. Food was always seen as really important. We always ate together at the table. Really kind of intrinsic value to food and eating. It was always seen as an important thing. It was never something I questioned. And the other thing was sport, because I did a sports science degree. I played sport all my life. So I wanted to not just like self-publish. I felt like I want to write for someone because that'll like make me do it while doing my dissertation. That'll provide some like some pressure to actually get it done. So I literally Googled like Bristol food publication submissions and Bristol sport publication submissions. And there was a company called Eat Collective, based in Bristol. And they were looking for, just at the time having to have open submissions for pitches around like basically any aspect of food. I can't even remember what I wrote about. It was something to do about like, the colonial history of like Bristol's food scene, because Bristol obviously is like a huge slave port, and you know that is kind of reflected in the culture today, in the population, in the kind of businesses that are there as well. So I pitched them, and they said, yeah, like we love this idea, which looking back is crazy because I probably sent 100 pitches and had about 6 accepted, and that was, you know, one of them. So they said, yeah, like feel free to write this thing for us. Here's your word count. Yeah, go for it. I took some pictures as well to go along with it. And I wrote that and I really enjoyed it. And I don't think I realized before how like food kind of, you can write about food, but you're really writing about any number of things, you know, like identity, like socioeconomic like issues, just the food itself. Like you can write about anything. Food is a window into like the entire world, in my opinion. So I wrote that article, it got published, and that was like a huge buzz. And then they asked me if I wanted to write more, and it kind of just went from there. And like every article I kind of wrote that was like about food or food adjacent, I was just like, this feels like really valuable to me, really important, and people seem to like it. So I just kind of made that my thing. It wasn't like a conscious, like I'm only going to write about food. And I have pitched other things, mainly to do with sport, but they've never been picked up. But like my food stuff has steadily built. So it was never like a conscious, I want to write about food. It was kind of the thing that seemed to land, which I seem to be good at. And yeah, the more I wrote about it, the more important it kind of felt. So yeah, that's the long answer. The short answer is because that's what people would commission, which I guess like a lot of writers can relate to. There's so many things you want to write about, but you're never allowed to. Especially as a freelancer, like it can feel like a very closed industry. It's like a very permission-based industry. So you as a writer might have a wonderful idea for a story, and unless it's an opinion piece, the first hurdle is obviously, how do I tell this story? I need sources that are willing to talk to me. So the first permission you have to ask is, you know, can I tell your story? Can I tell this story? And I think food writing has got much better in that regard. There used to be a lot of parachute journalism written by people like me, like middle-class white dudes who would like, you know, go on holidays somewhere and be like, oh, this curry is amazing, I must write about it. And now it's much more like people from those communities or the diaspora. So that's great. So for a lot of the stuff I do, you know, you're writing from sources, you're interviewing people, so you have to ask them for permission. Like, you know, do you want me to tell your story? Will you be interviewed? Can I put your name to it? So that's kind of the first hurdle. So you can do all that. And then you need to ask permission from a publication, which is pitching. So you pitch all these editors with this story you might have, you know, really thought about and developed, and it might be really important to you. And a lot of the times people don't want it. And that's the worst thing about being a journalist, in my opinion, is having these stories which you, for whatever reason, you're never able to tell. Often it's just, you know, they don't want it, or I assume they don't want it because the vast majority of editors will never reply to you. So out of all the publications I've pitched, I probably say 5 to 10% of the time I get a response, and 90% of the time that is a rejection. But it's in a situation where if you get a rejection, you're like, oh, thank you, you replied. And there are
It's a brutal numbers game, man.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I think, unfortunately, different writers have different levels of permission, if you want to put it like that. If you're more famous, if you have a bigger following, you're allowed to write about stuff because your name will draw in the clicks. So, if I pitch an article that, I don't know, like Jamie Oliver pitches, it's the same idea. They all say yes to him, but they will probably say no to me or just ignore me. And that's difficult. Like, if you want to get a chip on your shoulder, like become a journalist, become a freelancer, because you'll
develop a chip.
Yeah, man. Like it's really difficult to kind of have these ideas, and if you read a lot of journalism, you think I have a better idea than that, or my idea is more unique, or I have a great perspective, I have a great source. And for whatever reason, you're never allowed to write it. And then you're kind of faced with a choice. Do you self-publish? And a lot of sources won't go on the record if you self-publish because, they're not getting their story out there potentially. And also as a writer, self-publishing often can just feel like throwing stuff into the void because it doesn't have a big readership, whereas if it gets published in The Guardian, thousands of people are going to read it. So yeah, that's a real challenge for especially freelancers, but people on staff have it as well, where they're not allowed to write what they want to write. But yeah, I think I really value the editors that do reply. And I know everyone's busy, like we all ignore emails, but I could name a few, like the team at Vittles always reply, the team at Pellicle always reply. Harriet, food editor of the Financial Times, she always replies. And if these guys are replying, then you kind of look at everyone else and say, look, I know you're busy, but these people are finding the time for it. And I'm not saying they give you some big reason. They'll just say, hi, Jacob, this one isn't for us, but please contact us in the future. And that closure really helps. But yeah, that's not the case normally. And I've seen podcasts where established food writers complain about, only getting commissioned 50% of the pitches they take. And I kind of want to feel like if you hit 10%, in my experience, you're doing exceptionally well. And that's not a reflection on the quality of your work. That's just the industry. It's so hard to get commissioned, especially in the big publications. So a lot of the time you're just going to be ignored.
That is, man. That is to keep and I think that's, as you were saying, that you have to be passionate and determined and really, really want to do it and be like, no, this is what I'm gonna, it's like my calling kind of thing. It's like a purpose, because otherwise, what other industry is like that? That 95% of what you are putting in is just completely rejected, and then the thing, just not even getting a response. And I completely agree as well. It takes seconds to write an email, just say thank you but not this time kind of thing.
Yeah,
just to be respectful of somebody who's taking the time to write to you. And yeah, that really frustrates me.
Yeah, I mean, I get why people do it, because they must have being in media is difficult. People are very busy. But yeah, I do. When I worked at the Courier, I tried to reply to everyone. The only things I wouldn't reply to are and I still don't, if I get PR emails that obviously they don't know anything about me, I'll get emails about news story ideas in New York. And they've obviously, they're just sending that to everyone.
Yeah.
They haven't taken the time to look at what I do. So I draw the line there. I'm not replying to, that kind of spam almost. But anything else that is considered, I really try and reply to. And I hope that I will continue to do that. And that's not to say things haven't slipped through the cracks. I've definitely, not replied to everyone. But yeah, I think it's really important, if you're going to sit there and you've been on the other side, to then, if you do end up in a position of power, remember that.
That's it,
yeah, pull up the ladder. I'm here now. So yeah, I know various, creative people who have similar stories to tell, whether they're illustrators or novelists or that kind of thing. It's always when you get to the point where you want other people to read it, you have to go through that kind of third party, whether it's an agent or a publisher or a newspaper or whatever. That is really difficult because it relies on them, whether it sees the light of day. And while, like I've said in this podcast, I would write for myself, I'd write for no one to see it. You also want people to connect with your work. That's why I think a lot of the reason why we create stuff is to have that connection with people.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to, take a book off the shelf and feel a connection with a novelist who, you know, died 30 years ago. You're like reading their stuff and, you know, it connects with you. And I think that's, as writers, kind of what we all secretly want, is to kind of have that connection. And that often involves getting published elsewhere. So yeah, that's a frustrating thing.
If someone wants to find your work, where would they do it?
Good question. So I have a website, which is www.jacobsmith.com. That's probably the best place to find it, although it's only I have a portfolio of about 20 pieces on there, some photography, that kind of thing. And then if you go onto the Courier's website, all my articles for there on their website. So yeah, that's probably the best place to look, is my own website. Like I said, I'm taking a break from Instagram right now, but always happy to hear from people via email, etc., etc. And you know, I do really hope to get back into publishing more food writing first. At the moment, I'm trying to work through a book I'm working on.
That was my next question. Yeah, what are you working on?
Yeah, so in the background, I love journalism. I love food writing, but there's something about writing fiction that to me is kind of almost like a pure expression of writing.
That's what Ernest Hemingway said.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like it's all coming from you. And on one hand, you don't have to ask permission for anything. I can just sit down and write. Obviously, when it comes to publishing, that's when the whole permission thing comes in. But yeah, I'm working on a book, literary fiction novel. It's about idolatry, toxic masculinity, and male friendship. So it kind of charts a relationship between two men who work in a kitchen. One is senior, one is junior, and the junior one comes to idolize the senior one. And the book is kind of a study on how that idolatry can kind of poison a relationship. So I've been working on that for years. I had the first kind of kernel of it, the idea for it, when I was living in Spain, which was 2018. But working on it consistently for like 3-4 years. And I 47,000 words into the third draft. So I hopefully, now that I'm writing a lot, like when I was working at the Courier, I was probably writing for an hour, like between 6 and 7 in the morning, maybe once or twice a week, and then half of the day at the weekend. Getting like minimal stuff done, to be honest. And now that I have most of my days free, I tend to work 5 till close at the restaurant. I'm getting a lot more done. So I'm hoping to have this draft done by February, March. And then I have some people who are going to read it for me and maybe have another quick go through it and then submit it to agents and that kind of thing. So I have pitched some ideas for food writing. So, you know, people who listen to this, hopefully I will have some food writing coming out. You won't have to wait, 3 years for my book to be published before you read anything new. But at the moment, stuff hasn't landed. I think there's a lot of room, and even potentially in some of the nationals, to write about being a kitchen porter, because a lot of people find that quite interesting.
Yeah.
Especially the restaurant I work at, Dog Star. I'd say it's getting, like, it's only been open a few weeks, but it's getting quite a lot of momentum. We've had a lot of Michelin-starred chefs, a lot of food writers, critics, etc., come and say they really like the food. So I think kind of having that internal perspective on the effort and the sweat that goes into service and creating this wonderful food, hopefully there's kind of a market for people to read about that. So that's kind of my goal. Get the book published, have a few freelance things done on the side, and then see what else comes my way. But I think as a creative, like I said at the beginning, you need to be willing to work other jobs. I think most people's career trajectories are like a steady unsteady incline, but for creatives and for writers, I think you need to be willing to go up and down and up and down. And in terms of food writing, I had a huge up writing for the Courier, but that meant other things went down, like my fiction. And now I'm looking at it as in my fiction's taking priority, and my food writing I'll just kind of dabble away at. So there's a season for everything.
But yeah, sitting with that uncertainty must be really difficult.
It is. Like I said before, it just depends what kind of mood you're in. You can look at it as in like, working in the kitchen informs my novel, informs my food writing. For example, like if we win a Michelin star, like that's going to look amazing on my author bio. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing, like as self-absorbed as that is. But then other days you wake up and you're like, dude, I'm literally washing dishes for a living. Like, what's going on? And I think the only reason it kind of works is because the people around me are very understanding, very supportive. Like my partner, like I've gone from, a year ago I was working from home. So I was literally home all the time, always there. And now, I'm not there in the evenings or the weekend. But she's been really great about it. She said she doesn't particularly enjoy it, but she's willing to support me in it, and she's glad that I'm enjoying it. Same with my parents. I think so many people would be so scared to make that phone call. Like my contract's come to the end. They haven't extended me, and I'm gonna go wash dishes as a 29-year-old. But my mum and dad were like, amazing. That sounds so exciting. Like all this kind of thing. And actually, that's a real credit to them. So that definitely helps. I don't feel like pressure to do anything from any external sources in that regard. I think I'm also aware that this is probably some of the last few years where I can really do what I want in terms of, I don't have kids, I don't have a mortgage, I don't have anything like that. So I'm trying to, do all these things and then be like, well, at least I gave it a shot. If we did end up having a child in 3-4 years or whatever, and I did have to work a comms job somewhere that I didn't particularly enjoy, at least I could say, well, I wrote a book, it didn't get published, or I worked in a kitchen but I didn't particularly enjoy like the hours or whatever, but I've tried it. So that's kind of what keeps me going. But it's early days, so it's easy to put a brave face in it 2 weeks before Christmas and all that kind of thing. But it feels good at the moment, which is all I think you can do. I think I'm quite good at like sitting there and being like, right, is this actually going well? I think I can be quite honest with myself like that. And I think part of that is just sitting in the uncertainty. Like my whole career has been, self-employed or whatever. So I think you get very used to knowing when to worry and when to be like, all right, just stop freaking out. Like it is what it is. You'll be fine. And I think that's very valuable. So yeah.
Thank you for talking with me, Jacob. It was class. It was really, really interesting.
It's my pleasure. I love being an interviewee for once. It's great. Get to talk about yourself.
Oh man, yeah. Well, it was great to interview, man. That was so interesting, and I really do respect it as well. Just going for it, just that there isn't the assuredness, there isn't the salary, there isn't the. Sometimes, as you say, like it's the status and the that comes with all these sure things. But there's that. I remember just on the last point. There's a great clip of Jim Carrey, and he says that his dad was an accountant, and he hated it. And I can't remember what. I think he wanted to do something else, but he didn't. And he was accountant for years, and then he got laid off and made redundant. And yeah, I think they had to move. And the lesson that Jim Carrey took from that was that you can play it safe, and still you get screwed.
Exactly.
And so it's like you might as well just go for it.
Yeah. No, I definitely relate to that. And I think as well, it's easy to compare yourself to other people. But when I say, oh, it's my friend, you have a house, you have a flat, this is so amazing, they'll be like, yeah, but you enjoy your job. And if you're spending 40 hours a week doing something, to me, it's important that you at least think it's worthwhile. So yeah, I'm fortunate to be able to do that.
Cool. Jacob Smith, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross.